Your money dies long before you ever notice. It doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't collapse in a single catastrophic moment. It dissolves, quietly, atom by atom, until the day you wake up and realize the future you thought you were saving for has already been stolen. Not by chance, not by miscalculation, but by design. Every society that suffers a financial breakdown believes, at first, that everything is normal. The grocery aisles look the same. The banks smile the same rehearsed smiles. The digits in your account remain unchanged. But the value behind those digits is already rotting. The collapse begins long before the collapse is visible. Imagine a worker in any modern city, someone who has done everything right. They save diligently, they avoid debt, they trust in the promise that money today will still mean something tomorrow. Yet each month, an invisible hand siphons a fraction of their future away. Prices creep upward like a slow-moving plague.
Paychecks stretch thinner. The comfortable cushion of savings that once offered security now feels like sand slipping through fingers. That sensation, quiet panic, subtle dread, is the first symptom of a decaying currency. But the tragedy is that most people never recognize it until it's too late. Because the slow death of money is engineered to be imperceptible. Inflation is marketed as a natural occurrence, a background condition of life, something as normal as rain or gravity. But what if it isn't? What if inflation is the engineered leak in the financial vessel, an intentional weakening of purchasing power to ensure that stored value never remains in the hands of ordinary people for long? Savers are told this is healthy, that a little yearly erosion is good for the economy. But the only economy it benefits is the one that thrives on your dependency.
Across history, collapsing currencies often began with a sudden event. Coins clipped at the edges, silver diluted with base metals, banknotes printed faster than trust could keep up. But the modern decay is worse because it is invisible. There is no clipped coin to hold, no pile of worthless bills blowing in the streets. Digital numbers don't brown or wrinkle, yet they lose value just the same. And because you cannot see the decay, you cannot measure the theft, only the consequences. You begin to feel it in the tightening of your lifestyle, in the way your savings account grows on paper but shrinks in reality. In the cold realization that yesterday's dollars can no longer buy today's necessities. What once felt like progress now feels like quicksand. All collapses begin this way, with a quiet, engineered suffocation. And then comes the moment, the one historians always point to in hindsight, when the public finally realizes the truth. The tipping point usually arrives as a shock. A sudden spike in prices, a banking crisis, a market plunge. But the shock is just the reveal. The decay happened years before. For the average citizen, this revelation feels like betrayal. They thought they were building a future. They thought their savings were safe. But the system they trusted had been eroding their stability the entire time. The collapse wasn't an accident. It was the logical outcome of a structure designed to extract rather than preserve. Your savings were never meant to survive. A system built on perpetual debt cannot allow its citizens to accumulate independent wealth, because independent wealth means independence, and independence means you are harder to control. This is the doom. Not the dramatic crash, but the slow, silent truth that your money has been dying for years under the weight of policies crafted to weaken it. The collapse is not coming. It already started. The destruction of savings is not a modern invention. It is an ancient strategy, repeated so consistently across civilizations that it becomes less a coincidence and more a blueprint. Every empire, at the peak of its power, eventually reaches for the same lever, the silent manipulation of money. And every time, ordinary citizens pay the price, while the ruling class buys itself more time, more control, and more wealth. Look back far enough, and you find the same story etched into crumbling stone and fading parchment. Rome,
The empire that once commanded the known world began its decline not with invading armies, but with the quiet debasement of its currency. Silver coins were shaved, diluted, and reissued with less precious metal. To the people, nothing looked different. The emperor's face remained stamped on the surface, but the value had already decayed. Prices rose, trust faded, stability fractured. Rome's currency didn't collapse suddenly. It eroded, like a shoreline pulled apart by centuries of waves. The method was simple: weaken the money to strengthen the state. When the empire overspent on wars and luxuries, it paid its bills by degrading the currency. The people absorbed the cost through diminished savings and rising prices. That ancient trick has survived for 2,000 years. Jump forward to Weimar Germany, where hyperinflation became the most famous monetary catastrophe of the 20th century. The printing presses roared around the clock, spewing out money faster than anyone could count it. Savings evaporated overnight. Workers were paid twice a day because their wages lost value between morning and afternoon. And while the world remembers the chaos of wheelbarrows full of banknotes, the more painful truth is this: the economic decay began long before the public saw the flames. Long before the printing frenzy, the currency had already been weakened by years of hidden financial mismanagement. Then there's the United States in the 1970s. No hyperinflation, no wheelbarrows, yet the pattern remained the same. The dollar was quietly severed from gold, untethered from any physical constraint. The moment convertibility died, the currency became a tool of policy rather than a store of value. This shift was framed as necessary, inevitable, even beneficial, but it opened the door to the same ancient cycle of controlled devaluation. Savings accounts that once grew with real purchasing power became stagnant pools slowly drained by inflation. The public was told this was normal. History suggests otherwise. What ties these eras together is not the specific economic crisis, but the psychological one. People trust their rulers to protect the value of their money. But rulers, regardless of century, culture, or ideology, eventually find themselves trapped by the same temptation. When faced with debt, war, or political instability, it is always easier to weaken the currency than to admit failure. Currency decay becomes the quiet tax, the hidden extraction, the invisible method of transferring wealth from the many to the few. And so the pattern repeats: debasement, inflation, erosion of trust, collapse. Civilizations have different languages, different flags, different philosophies, but their financial downfalls rhyme with unnerving precision. If history teaches anything, it is this: no empire protects the value of its money indefinitely. Every empire eventually sacrifices its currency to prolong its power. This is not a flaw. It is the operating system of empire. The past is not past. It is repeating itself in real time. Only this time, the mechanism is invisible, digital, and far more efficient. The same pattern that crushed savings in ancient Rome, that hollowed out Weimar Germany, that reshaped the global order in the 1970s, is now unfolding quietly behind the glow of your home screen. And most people don't see it, because the modern version leaves no physical trace, no clipped coins, no stacks of worthless banknotes, just numbers that shrink in value while appearing unchanged. Today's currency decay hides behind sophisticated language, quantitative easing, liquidity injection, negative real interest rates, inflation targeting. These terms are not explanations, they are camouflage. They mask a simple truth: the system is extracting value from your savings faster than at any point in modern history. Consider the present moment. Central banks create money with a keystroke. Governments expand debt ceilings as if they were adjusting the brightness on a lamp. Banks lend out deposits they don't fully possess. And through it all, the average person believes their savings sit safely in an account, untouched, stable. But stability is a performance. The real value of those digits erodes with every policy decision made far above your line of sight. Look at inflation today. Not the sanitized, curated number printed in official reports, but the lived reality. The rising cost of housing, energy, food, healthcare, education. These are not natural movements of a market adapting to supply and demand. They are the direct consequences of a financial architecture that requires perpetual expansion. When expansion slows, the system weakens. So the money supply must grow. And when the money supply grows, the purchasing power of your savings shrinks. The trap is not a future danger. It has already snapped shut. The digitalization of money has made this process even more insidious. In the past, people could at least see the physical indicators of decay. Thin coins, pale banknotes, frantic printing. Today, currency exists as code, and code does not decay visibly. The number in your bank account can stay perfectly still while its real-world power collapses in silence. $1,000 today will not buy what it did 5 years ago, and 5 years from now, it will buy even less. The loss is certain, but the theft is invisible. What makes the modern trap even more dangerous is its psychological dimension. People are conditioned to believe inflation is unavoidable, that savings must lose value, that the only path to survival is to participate in endless consumption or speculation. This conditioning is not an accident. It keeps the public compliant while obscuring the truth. The erosion of your savings is not a market flaw, it is the design. And unlike past empires, today's monetary system is global, coordinated, and synchronized. When one nation weakens its currency, others follow to remain competitive. There is no safe harbor within the existing structure, because the structure itself relies on devaluation as its lifeblood. The modern financial world does not collapse with a bang. It collapses with a quiet, continuous hum. A hum so constant, most people mistake it for silence. They don't realize what's happening until the moment they try to use their savings and discover the value has evaporated. This is the parallel. The tactics are ancient. The technology is new. The outcome is identical. Your savings are being drained in real time, not by accident, but by architecture. There is a moment in every financial unraveling when the pattern stops looking like chaos and starts looking like intention. When you shift your gaze from the symptoms to the structure, a single truth emerges with chilling clarity. Your savings are not disappearing into thin air. They are being redirected. And once you see the beneficiaries, the entire system snaps into focus. Behind the slow death of money lies a network of institutions whose power depends on your dependence. Central banks, government treasuries, multinational financial firms, and the elite circles that move between them without ever being seen by the public they influence. These entities do not operate as isolated actors. They function as a coordinated architecture, an ecosystem designed to extract value from the population while presenting the decay as natural, unavoidable, even desirable. Start with central banks. They claim to protect purchasing power, yet their primary tool, controlled inflation, guarantees its destruction. When they expand the money supply, the new money does not flow evenly through society. It enters at the top, through commercial banks, investment funds, and government contracts. By the time it reaches ordinary citizens, prices have already risen. The elites receive the benefits. Everyone else absorbs the cost. This phenomenon has a name, the Cantillon effect. But in practice, it is simply legalized wealth transfer. Governments play their part through debt. They borrow endlessly, spending money they do not have because they know the repayment will not come from their own pockets. It comes from you, from your future earnings, your taxes, your disappearing purchasing power. Debt is framed as public investment, but in truth, it is a binding chain. The more a government borrows, the more inflation it must tolerate. The more inflation it tolerates, the more your savings erode. Meanwhile, the political class shields itself with assets that rise in value as currency weakens: real estate, equities, insider access. You are told to save cash. They save power. Then there are the financial institutions, too big to fail, yet always failing upward. Their profits depend on the constant movement of money. Stagnant savings are useless to them. So they engineer a world in which holding cash feels like falling behind, pushing citizens into riskier assets they barely understand. When markets soar, institutions win. When markets crash, institutions are bailed out. Either way, the extraction continues. But the most dangerous architects are not individuals or corporations. It is the ideology that binds them. The belief that economies must grow forever, that debt must always climb, that inflation is a necessary lubricant. This doctrine is presented as science, as inevitability, as the natural law of modern finance. Yet it functions as a smokescreen, hiding the simplest truth. If money did not lose value, ordinary people could accumulate real independence. And independence is the one thing the system cannot allow. Because once people can stand on their own, they can walk away. The narrative is carefully constructed to keep you compliant. You are told inflation is harmless. You are told rising prices are global. You are told saving is responsible. But behind those reassurances stands an uncomfortable reality. Every year, the system quietly absorbs a percentage of your future. Not through taxes, not through fees. Through the engineered decay of the currency you are forced to rely on. This is the revelation lurking beneath the surface of every economic headline. Your savings do not disappear. They are taken. Not by chance, not by mismanagement, but by a design perfected over centuries. One that protects the architects while weakening everyone else. And the most haunting truth is this: they don't need to steal your money outright. They only need to let it die. The decay of savings has always followed the same trajectory: slow erosion, sudden revelation, irreversible collapse. Every era believes it is different, more advanced, more stable, more insulated. Yet every era eventually learns the same painful truth: no system built on currency degradation can protect its citizens forever. The question is not if the cycle ends, but when, and whether you are still inside it when the collapse arrives. Today, the warning signs are no longer subtle. They pulse beneath the surface of everyday life. Rising prices that defy official explanations. Wages that fail to keep pace. Savings accounts that grow numerically but shrink in reality. These are not isolated signals. They are early tremors of an approaching breakpoint. The moment when public trust fractures and the system can no longer mask its own contradictions. But inevitability does not mean helplessness. It means recognition. It means stepping outside the machinery before it grinds you down with everyone else. Every empire that debased its currency left behind a lesson. Individuals who sensed the shift early, who understood the mechanics of decay, were able to preserve their wealth, their autonomy, and often their future. Those who didn't were swept into the collapse alongside the institutions that failed them. The deciding factor was always awareness. Awareness creates distance. Distance creates choice. That choice exists today, even as the cycle accelerates. You cannot stop governments from printing money. You cannot stop central banks from manipulating rates. You cannot stop financial institutions from feeding on the movement of capital. But you can refuse to play the role the system expects from you, the compliant saver who watches their wealth evaporate quietly. Escape does not come from panic or rebellion. It comes from extraction. Extracting yourself from the illusion that your savings are safe simply because they sit in a regulated institution. True preservation lies outside the structures that rely on your dependence. Throughout history, people have turned to assets that resist debasement: gold, land, scarce resources, decentralized systems. Not because they are perfect, but because they exist beyond the reach of the mechanisms designed to melt money into nothingness. The first step is seeing the architecture for what it is: a cycle of engineered decay masquerading as stability. The second step is refusing to let your future be defined by forces that view your savings as fuel for their survival. And yet, there is a deeper inevitability, one that carries both danger and hope. Systems built on extraction always expand until they break. But individuals who recognize the pattern early can position themselves outside the blast radius. The collapse becomes not an ending, but a transition, not a void, but a clearing. Throughout history, new systems rise from the failure of the old, and those who preserved their independence become the architects of what comes next. The doom has already unfolded. The pattern has already repeated. The parallel is already in motion. The revelation has already exposed the architects. Now, the final truth remains. You were never meant to keep your savings, but you were always capable of escaping the design. This is your inevitability. You cannot save the system, but you can save yourself. And once enough people step outside the trap, the cycle, centuries old, meticulously engineered, finally fractures. Not because the architects allow it, but because their power only exists when you stay inside the walls.